For the first time at the NovaCare Complex, the entire Philadelphia Eagles 2024 roster hit the practice field for the start of OTAs. Takeaways coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Eagles fans? Welcome into this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host, Gino Camilleri. You can find our work also over at Bleacher Report. On today's edition of the show, the Eagles have started up OTAs. We have takeaways from both the offensive and defensive side of the football, plus some former Miami Dolphins players for Vic Fangio had some things to say about the Eagles' new defensive coordinator. Should we be concerned about those comments? All that and more in today's edition of the show. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Gino's OTAs, I felt like I had to put on my special teams coordinator outfit. I put a bucket hat on and the short sleeve hoodie. I don't know, I just feel like this is a summer football look. I'm just feeling OTAs. I love me some Eagles OTA play-by-play on Twitter.
For those who are listening, Lou currently looks like he's a graduate assistant at his first job out of college,
exactly
trying to get to a big FBS program. That's quite literally what he looks like. But no, it's just guys in shells, guys in shorts, guys in just their basic stuff, no pads or anything. But at the same time, these guys are athletes. They get to go out there and compete for the first time as a full roster. It's the first time these rookies get to say, oh, this is what the level of play, the level of quickness is at the NFL level. There's also some takeaways from a veteran perspective, guys who didn't show up, guys who are at practice, maybe a cornerback who potentially could be on his way out of Philadelphia, gave us a little inkling potentially where his head could potentially be at. But at the end of the day, shout out to all the beat writers that gave us just those little clips from practice. Those are those little things that guys like you and I, for so many years growing up, and the everydayers out there, those are what you hold on to in these months of May and June, when you're just hoping that training camp gets here soon enough for this 2024 season.
No, absolutely, Gino. And it was funny even seeing just the small takeaways. Like there was a video of Jalen Hurts taking shotgun snaps, and I noticed his stance is a little bit higher now that he doesn't have to get so low. Kelsey, right? It's back to more of his stance from Alabama and Oklahoma. It's cool just to see like Saquon Barkley in an Eagles jersey for the first time. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back rocking the number 8. Bryce Huff rocking number 0. All the rookies hitting the field again, just like they did for mini camps. I just, again, there's not anything crazy. Like you said, they're not in shoulder pads. They're not going to show much when it comes to like the scheme or even the depth chart right now. I can't imagine Vic Fangio is going to put rookies out there with the first team. So not a lot of huge takeaways, but I think there's some fun stuff and some other things that I actually did notice that we'll get into.
The couple things that you could start to take away from OTAs are not how the depth chart is going to potentially play out, but who could potentially get that first crack at those second team or third team reps once training camp does come around. And we saw today, for example, look at the outside cornerback position. The first guy up with James Bradberry, who did not report to OTAs today, even though they were voluntary. He was not there along with a couple of other players. But on the outside, it was Darius Slay and Isaiah Rodgers. And then Avonte Maddox was the first guy up on the inside. But at the same time, you see guys like Cooper DeJean getting reps on the outside, as well as Avonte Maddox getting reps at safety, and Quinyon Mitchell is up with the second team. So you could start to kind of fiddle those pieces together and start to fill in a little bit of the cracks, but nothing is set in stone, obviously. I mean, there's 4 months until we actually kick off, but this is the first time that those guys that participated in rookie camp, plus the veterans, actually come together. Now with the new coordinators, you're seeing some new elements from these beat writers who had reported some interesting things. If you just read these tweets in real time, you could start to pick up little hints. And there's actually a great Twitter account. It is called NFL Beat Writers, and they just retweet every beat writer account from every team, and that's really where you learn the ins and outs of these rosters.
Yeah, for sure. And Gino, again, somebody missing one practice, the first one, especially if they're a veteran for voluntary OTAs, isn't the biggest problem. It's not the end of the world. Like Lane Johnson
Ask
wasn't
Fletcher
there today.
Cox
Josh
about
Sweat
that one a couple years ago, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I will say James Bradberry not being there is absolutely noteworthy because we know the Eagles have invested so much at corner right now to probably replace him. We know long term and maybe even for the short term, bringing in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, having Keely Ringo in year 2 and Eli Ricks and Isaiah Rodgers. Him not being there right now, it's interesting. I don't know if it was on purpose, if that means he's about to get cut or about to get traded, but Bradberry is a little bit of a different story compared to like a Josh Sweat or a Lane Johnson for sure.
Or even a Devontae Smith as well. I'm sure they all had different personal reasons why they couldn't attend. But the James Bradberry one, especially the response from Darius Slay, it was really interesting. Darius Slay almost responded as if James Bradberry had lost like a loved one or something. He said, well, he is in good spirits when I talk to him. And it's kind of interesting that a veteran who just signed that extension and sees potentially the writing on the wall is saying things like this to Darius Slay behind closed doors. I don't know exactly what was uttered, but actions speak louder than words. He doesn't show up for the first practice today at a position where they invested multiple assets. It's not a good look if you're James Bradberry, and if Vic Fangio saying, who can I rely on day one? Well, this guy's not there day one, Mr. Fangio, unless he's got a really good excuse. This is one position where it's like, yeah, Devontae has a job. Lane has a job. Does James Bradberry really have a job?
Right, Bradberry does not. No, I don't think so, and that's why it's definitely noteworthy. It's also noteworthy at corner that I don't know Isaiah Rodgers being the number one guy up on the boundary means much because Quinyon Mitchell is a rookie, so is Cooper DeJean. Vic Fangio is an old school coach. Like I just can't imagine he's going to put a rookie corner on the outside of the first team day one. But he was ahead of somebody like Eli Ricks. Keely Ringo wasn't really there, though, either today at practice. So, again, not much to report there. However, Cooper DeJean starting things off, Gino, in the slot, though, where he was primarily playing with the second team, is noteworthy because we were wondering where are they going to start him off. We know eventually we want him to be that star player that roams around, plays some nickel, plays some outside, plays some safety. He's your Brian Branch or even to a degree a different style of like a Kyle Hamilton Swiss Army knife. But I think they will want to start him off at one spot after hearing Vic Fangio talk a few weeks ago. And it was interesting to see that it was the slot. I like that, though, because that tells me long term they hope to make him be that role we're talking about versus maybe they envisioned him as a boundary guy long term. So I like that he was playing in the slot to start things off, whereas like an Avonte Maddox was the one playing some nickel, playing some safety. Maybe he's the one they move around the formation early on while Sidney Jones is recovering from an injury and Cooper DeJean is learning the ways of being a pro.
If I had to kind of boil that all down into one takeaway, it kind of just falls into what Vic Fangio sees in his players in that defensive secondary, and they are all defensive backs. They're not just corners. They're not just safeties. I mean, outside of Darius Slay, who for sure is going to be your one island type of guy, set him out there, go take away the number one. Every other player, quite literally, Cooper DeJean, when he was drafted, the Eagles tweeted it out. They said, Cooper DeJean, defensive back, Iowa. All of these guys are going to hopefully play all over the formation because Avonte Maddox, if that's how he's going to make the roster, that's a benefit because you have to be versatile in Philadelphia. We have talked about that time and time again. So if you're just going to be a one-dimensional player, you're more than likely going to hit the road with this defensive back group because there's 13 guys competing for maybe 7 or 8 jobs right now.
Yeah, you want them to be versatile, but you're right. Like a lot of these guys to make the roster to survive are going to have to be versatile.
Yes.
And that's why
it's like on the offensive line. If you're a guard and you don't know how to snap the ball, you better learn how to snap the ball if you want a chance to make it in the NFL.
Absolutely. So those were some of the big takeaways on the defensive side of the ball. Gino, it was also really good to hear Jaylen Carter talk about some things. He mentioned that conditioning is huge, especially now that he knows he's going to have to play a lot more, even compared to last year. He had a big role as a rookie, one of the bigger roles we're used to for an Eagles rookie over the last few years, seen a lot of redshirt type seasons, but this year even more without Fletcher Cox. He's going to be the guy, and he hit that rookie wall kind of in the second half of the year. So it was good to hear him really kind of focus on that being a big part of his game he wants to improve upon in year two, because they need him, not just because Cox is gone, but because Hassan Reddick's gone. I think he needs to be that go-to impact player on the defensive line.
I think all the guys should kind of take that in stride and use that as something to kind of grow off of where they let themselves down in 2023. Because if you look at the last 7 games of last year, everybody fell off. How many games were they in where they just could not close it out in the fourth quarter? That's a huge element to this team, and especially for the young guys. If you're coming into this league and you're just expecting to be in college shape, and maybe that's what Jordan Davis was doing the last 2 years, and he finally has figured it out that, I have to get in NFL shape to hopefully project or to launch my career to where I think it should be. Jaylen Carter being a second-year player, identifying that right away, stepping into a leadership role, holding himself accountable. If that blue-chip guy who now is the anchor of your defense is saying that and preaching that and doing that every single day, well, everybody else on that defensive line should be doing that. So I like to see these guys, especially the young players, pick up things in stride, especially early on. Jaylen Carter, not somebody who really talks a ton, but when he does talk, you kind of want to listen to what he says, and I'm glad to see him kind of stepping into this role and growing into his leadership role, which I think the Eagles really knew that he was going to have to take probably within a year or two from Fletcher Cox.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. All right, Gino, let's get into some offensive takeaways from day one of OTAs coming up next, right here as we continue on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investments and retirement accounts in just one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand every great investor goes to. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They're the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, so much more. Securely link your brokerage account for a unified view of your wealth, including 401ks and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and that's how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand every great investor knows, yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, it's a Wednesday edition of the podcast, and the OTAs have kicked off, so you should stick it to Locked On Eagles. But have you been watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You got to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. You should make the switch as well to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Eagles hit the field for the first day of voluntary OTAs at NovaCare Complex. A lot of defensive takeaways to get into, especially in the secondary, Gino. Some good comments from, I loved hearing Darius Slay talk about, wanting to be there day one, even for voluntary camp, for all these young corners. Like, that shows he's a great leader and sometimes doesn't give enough credit for that. And I was kind of joking. James Bradberry texted him saying, he wants to help these guys as well. I said, well, you can help them by giving them your roster spot. That's how James Bradberry can help these young kids for 2024. On the offensive side of the ball, again, there's not much to take away from this practice. But I will say one thing I got excited about was some of the schematic points of Kellen Moore's offense, like you saw somebody tweeted out that the wheel route is back. We haven't really seen that utilized since Miles Sanders is a rookie in 2019. It was a great play by Devin White, I guess, going toe-to-toe with Saquon Barkley down the field. But I love hearing like that's a play they're bringing back because that's something they didn't do with DeAndre Swift, even though Brian Johnson probably should have thought about it. And Miles Sanders really wasn't used in that way as a downfield threat at running back since it's been 5 years. So to hear they're doing that and using so much pre-snap motion already in a lot of these looks, that really excites me.
I think the best thing that Saquon did today, or that came out about Saquon today, was that it was reported that he said he felt like a rookie again going back to camp. And I think that's pretty damning if you're a Giant fan and see the situation that had just played out with Saquon Barkley leaving and going to a division rival. But to just read those tweets, Lou, does it even seem real to you yet?
No, seeing the tweet, Devin White stops Saquon Barkley in an Eagles practice.
Surreal.
Bananas. And then just to see him in an Eagles helmet, it feels so wrong yet so right because he was a division rival that kicked your butt for so long. And we know in the past, like NFC East rivals coming to Philly, especially in Dallas, don't always work. But at the same time, like this isn't your typical former Giant or former Cowboy. Like this was a guy that went to Penn State. This was a guy that grew up in this area. So it feels so wrong yet so right at the same time.
People make the joke about how so evident that Micah Parsons wants to be an Eagle.
I guarantee you by the end of his career, he's going to be an Eagle.
I think he's going to get a lifelong Cowboy contract. I really do. I think he's going to reset the market. That's like a Jerry type of player, like a prize fair type of player. But in reality, Saquon, it always felt like destiny that he kind of was going to come back here at one point or another. And I'm glad, man, because you see Chris Franklin, I believe, reported it out today that AJ Brown was moved around a lot.
Yeah.
In Kellen Moore's practices today.
Which I love.
And seeing Saquon Barkley get hit on a wheel route or two and seeing what these guys will be able to do with a coordinator that finally understands that guys do not have to go out there and stand in the position where you laid out the play on the whiteboard 10 months prior. You can move them around and create advantages and create leverage based on motion. That's my big takeaway from today. Kellen Moore, his identity is going to be imprinted on this offense immediately. And the idea of his principles meshing with Nick Sirianni's principles, I'm excited to see where it goes, man, because if you get some of those high-flying elements that we saw from the Eagles offense the last 2 years with that motion and creativity element, that's what we've been hoping for here at Locked On Eagles, and that's what we were saying for 2023 the entire year. Just move these guys around and get the best leverage available, allow A.J. Brown to win these two-way goes, allow Saquon Barkley to be a Texas route just absolute demon out there. Allow these guys to just be great at one-on-ones, but at the same time, they don't have to be statues and just sit in quicksand.
Well, when I had Chris Franklin on the podcast last week or 2 weeks ago, I even told him, like, I think this offense, it can work where you mesh these schemes. It's not going to be like 2020 where there's too many cooks in the kitchen. Like, I think pre-snap motion can really help an Eagles team that likes to use option. I think when you imagine you're doing like a triple option type of thing in the backfield where it's Jalen Hurts next to Saquon Barkley and Anais Smith's in the slot and they call him in motion and he goes into the backfield and then boom, they're using a Panthers 2015 like triple option kind of thing. I think these philosophies can mesh really well. And I think we're going to be during the season in the best case scenario watching some of this creativity and saying, why the F were we not doing this before? It makes so much sense for this offensive style. Why were they so vanilla? I really think the way Kellen Moore is implementing this creativity, the motion, and more than just motion, I think it's really going to benefit and I think just enhance what the Eagles already do well. I don't think it's going to get in the way or kind of handcuff the positives they already had.
And those were the things that were getting him praise when he first started as an offensive play caller in Dallas. And then when he moves on to the Chargers and there's going to be some downfalls to Kellen Moore. And there's a reason why this is his third job in the last 4 seasons. I mean, there's no fault of his own why he gets let go from the Chargers. But now this is an offense, in my opinion, that you needed somebody different to come in and stir things up, not to completely change the recipe, but add a little flavor. Hey,
and to enhance
maybe
it.
this
It's like you're
spice
adding
will be a little
spice.
bit.
You're
That's
not
all
throwing
it
the
is.
whole meal out the window.
Hey, you're throwing
adding
rosemary and thyme. What if we put a little sage? What if we put a little oregano in
Let's
there?
throw a
That's
little
what we
Cajun in
need.
there. Let's see if that works.
Yeah, let's spice it up, or let's throw a sour beer on the side if we're Lou DiBiase.
Hey man,
a pickle pizza like a psychopath.
That's the move.
That
I do have a pretty unique and gross palate for most people's standards, but yeah, I'm with you. That's got to be Kellen Moore's style this year. The first practice excited me in that way. A couple depth chart things, not too much of a surprise here. Devontae Parker retiring. Paris Campbell got the first team reps at receiver, especially with Devontae Smith out. He's going to be that first guy up, especially to start. The guys behind him are rookies, and Johnny Wilson and Aniyah Smith. Tyler Steen gets the first team reps at right guard, to nobody's surprise. Any takes with the offensive depth chart?
I think it's pretty kind of spot on what we had expected.
Agreed.
A lot of competition with those bottom half wide receivers is going to be just downright evident, and I think it's going to be very top heavy, that we won't see a lot of secrets exposed in training camp with how they're going to use the guys like Devontae Smith and AJ Brown and Saquon Barkley. Yeah, we see the wheel route, but a lot of teams use a wheel route in today's National Football
But this
League,
team
right?
hasn't, man. The wheel route's so back. I love it.
It's crazy that we have to sit here and say, like, oh, simple things are,
what it
now
reminds me
pleasing
of?
us.
When Chip Kelly finally got fired and we were used to that fast-paced no-huddle offense, I remember the first preseason game seeing the Eagles huddle up. Something so simple.
Took like 32 seconds to call play, and you're like, yes, I love this.
Normal football is back. My team is back. Yeah. I think that's going to be a fun offense to watch in 2024. We'll continue to cover it right here on Locked On Eagles. Coming up next, though, got some Vic Fangio talk for you. Some Dolphins players have made comments about Fangio, but Carter and Slay also did today in a positive way. Do we have any concerns about his coaching style with the Eagles in 2024? We'll get into it. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Fans, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. The Eagles have hit the field for the first time at the NovaCare Complex for voluntary OTAs. A really fun time following along. All the beat reporters very jealous they get to be on the practice field, but nonetheless, they're doing God's work right now, entertaining us on Eagles Twitter during a time where there's not a lot of news going on when it comes to like roster moves and things like that. Gino, some news though when it comes to an Eagles coach and Vic Fangio. So we heard this a few months ago that Jalen Ramsey made a comment about feeling like sometimes he wasn't put in the best position to succeed last year in Miami's secondary. Well, then another pretty prominent player in that secondary, Javon Holland, made a comment today about Fangio and that defense last year and kind of reiterated what Ramsey was talking about. So a little bit of a negative light on Vic there from his former players, and there were rumors that he didn't really get along with some of the guys in Miami last year. However, you see on this side of things, Jaylen Carter says he loves the old school style of Vic and how he's fitting in perfectly. And Darius Slay says he's not sure what happened over there, but it's only been positive so far. Do you have any concerns with some, these aren't random players in Miami that are making comments. Of course, Jalen Ramsey's got a track record for some things, of course, going back to his Jacksonville days. But do you have any concerns about some of these negative comments about the Eagles' new DC?
I think saying things about a coach when they're gone, it's better off in like a group chat with your buddies behind closed doors than it is in the media. First off, like the anonymous scout thing, I think it's kind of at least you're putting your face to it, like Javon Holland and Jalen Ramsey. I agree with. They have their right to say it. I think it is what it is. You have a new defensive coordinator, move on. I like what Jaylen Carter and Darius Slay had to say, but at the end of the day, this comes down to one individual. It comes down to Dollar Store Andrew Tate and the guy who was currently coaching the Arizona Cardinals. Because if he wasn't the rat that he was and did everything slimy that he did in his end of his Eagles tenure, Vic Fangio would have been able to watch Tuesday night Philly games down at CBP last year and would have been the defensive coordinator right after Jonathan Gannon left, and none of this would have had to happen. And I think Vic Fangio just wanted to be in Philadelphia all along. And he was like, all right, I got to go down to Miami. I'm going to go on a vacation. I'm going to be a football coach, though, but then I'm going to go back up to Philly and be where I want to be.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think talking about a guy once he's gone is kind of lame, although I do like that they weren't anonymous like some past Eagles. Overall, for me, like I'm kind of in the middle here. I typically don't love an old school coach, especially with the modern day athlete that says he wants practice, every single day and, this hardcore style. For me, I kind of, just at least my style, I kind of tune that out. And I've been a little concerned about players or coaches that like are very set in stone with a certain scheme, because sometimes I get nervous that they'll play the better scheme fit more so than maxing out the best players and fitting them, molding the scheme around the players rather than vice versa. So two elite defensive backs saying things like that about not being put in position concerns me a little bit. However, Vic Fangio's resume speaks for itself. I mean, a lot of guys have liked his style in the past. The numbers speak for themselves. Like, he consistently is ranked in the top 10 in total defense. And maybe this team exactly needs a hardcore coach after collapsing last year, and they're a lot younger when it comes. These aren't established 30-year-old veteran stars on defense anymore. They're first, second, third-year players. So maybe this is the style of coach, although I don't love that kind of guy long-term. Maybe for right now, that's exactly what this defense needs.
Well, we were just talking about with Kellen Moore on offense was just the complete opposite to the blandness of Brian Johnson, adding some spice to it.
Sure.
Well, Vic Fangio, you go from Matt Patricia, who led a clown show in Detroit, and I'm sure that defensive room last year wasn't much better. And you talk about what Sean Desai failed to do in his tenure. Maybe that was what Nick Sirianni and this franchise wanted all along, was that hard-nosed guy, was that guy that's going to lay down the law when they needed him to at the same time. But his resume speaks for himself. He has to go out there, though, and like you said, understand that, yes, he can be an old-school coach, but he still has elite playmakers, like the Jalen Ramseys and the Javon Hollins of the world, that he can put in a position to succeed and put them sometimes above the scheme. So there is that give and take to it both ways. I still think he is the hire that should have been made last year. A lot of that talent would have fit what he wanted to do. You saw the inklings of what they started to do in this draft with moving towards that Vic Fangio scheme, saying that Jalen Hunt was arguably his favorite player out of the entire class. That's a lot to go and draft him. But Vic, man, he's not going to have a long leash. That is for sure, especially with all of the assets that they have brought in.
Yeah.
Defensive coordinator in Philly, it's not a seat that you should feel comfortable sitting on.
Like, if this guy's playing James Bradberry 5, 6, 7 weeks into the year and he's playing like Ronald Darby and Quinyon Mitchell's on the bench, like that's something like that would be a
he's
problem.
not going to be above scrutiny at all. That's not what we're saying about him whatsoever.
Like, let's say he's forcing Zach Bond, who Zach Bond, by the way, took first-team reps today at linebacker with Devin White. Like, if Zach Bond's somebody that he's forcing in the middle of the field and the younger guys like Nakobe Dean or Jeremiah Trotter Jr. can't get on the field, like, those are things that that's when I have reservations. That's what I had problems with when it came to Jim Schwartz back in the day. But overall, like, Fangio's scheme, most of the NFL tries to replicate it to a certain degree. It's a pretty damn
there's
good
a
scheme.
Reason why all those guys
I'm
were
not
hired
saying
for the
he
last
shouldn't be
couple
using
years.
this scheme and it's a problem. I just want to make sure at the same time there's a marriage between the scheme and the talent where also the best players are out there. Like, we're not keeping better talent out on the sidelines because this older, less talented guy just, fits in more with what he's looking to do.
But we've seen really good defenses from Vic, man. You've seen some good defenses.
Sure. And the Dolphins
Denver
defense last year was good before they had a catastrophic amount of injuries at the end of the year.
Dude, they were playing Bruce Irvin as an edge rusher.
Right, because Phillips went down, Chubb, everybody, and their entire secondary got hurt.
They were handcuffed in multiple ways. That were tough on Vic. But I go back to that Bears defense, man, and I always will bring up the Bryce Callahan example of a player who might not be a Darius Slay, but that scheme elevating that type of player. That's what Vic has to do. He has to mesh the great players with those guys that the Devin Whites, like, can I get the best out of Devin White for this year? Can I get the best out of a Reed Blankenship? Can I get the best out of whatever my second cornerback is while meshing it with all of these elite talents that I
do you know who I think he's like? He's the Tom Thibodeau or the John Tortorella of the NFL. He's a coach that I think is perfect when you have a younger team that you need to have overachieve on one side of the ball. And then when you have an older, more established team with stars like a Jalen Ramsey, maybe he's not the right coach for that kind of squad. So I think for
That's
the
fair.
Eagles and where they're at timeline right now, I think he's a perfect fit for this defense. So I'm in the middle. Definitely want to see how this works out. And like you said, a DC and Philly, it's a tough job to have, and it's a short leash, but I think Fangio's the right man for the job as of right now. We'll continue to cover OTAs all throughout the week and the month right here on Locked On Eagles. Make sure you subscribe on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Thanks for making us your first listen each and every day. That'll do it, though, for today's show. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.